Hi, everyone. Good to see you, Juan Carlos. Doing all right. How about you?
Good.
All right. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah.
And hi, Mark. Pleasure to have you here. I think you might be on mute.
You'd think I would have learned by now, but thank you. Thanks for having this. It's good to be here.
Of course. Yeah. Glad to have you both. Since it's more intimate today, we can take time and really get to know each other and what our goals are for this webinar. So just introducing myself, my name is Violet Luxton, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a fellow at the Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence. And I'm also a PhD candidate in cultural studies. So today I'm going to give a theoretical, etymological approach to curriculum building. So really getting into the theory, the key words, the terminology of teaching, learning, curriculum, culture, inclusivity, and what some of these words that are tossed around, trying to break them down before we get into some curriculum building ourselves. But it'll be a little heavier on the theoretical side, and then we'll get into some practical application towards the end. But feel free to introduce yourself, share what your program is and why you decided to come today and what your goals are for the webinar.
Okay. I'll start. Mark Smith. I am a PhD candidate in political science, specializing in political theory, American politics, and public law. I am defending my dissertation next month. This will be, I'm looking to start my teaching career after a 41-year career as an investment manager. So I retired from that in August, and I've been at Claremont, started here in 2018 on my master's, and am now to this point with my doctorate. I'm hoping to start teaching sometime at the end of this year or next year. I'm applying for several positions, both adjunct, temporary, permanent, tenure track, anything they'll give me for right now, at least to get the experience, because I don't have any teaching experience. But I've been following the webinars and looking at some of the YouTube videos, and haven't been able to actually join the cafe curriculum, but have been following it, and obviously been working really hard on getting to this point where I finished my dissertation last month. So I'm defending it
Congratulations.
25th of next month. Thank you. So I'm here to learn as much as I possibly can about everything there is to know to actually start classroom teaching.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
That's a great, wonderful place to be in. So a lot of wonderful things ahead, but a lot of accomplishments behind you as well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And thankfully, Juan Carlos is a fellow as well and TAing some of our classes. So it's actually a perfect match here today. So I'm really glad both of you can connect because he can tell you so much about what the TNDY courses are and a little bit of the difference. And so yeah, Juan Carlos, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm in cultural studies, PhD in cultural studies, but also got a master's in information systems and technology from CGU. And welcome. Congratulations on your trajectory at CGU. Seems like you've gotten a lot out of it. So yeah, I'm a cafe fellow, and I'm TAing one of the cafe courses, the second one, cafe 530, and I'm also TAing another course, AI and Humanity, for it's a TNDY class, where it's anyone in any major could take it because AI has been such a big thing lately. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I've taught for a good amount of years, Pasadena City College as adjunct. I also teach playwriting at Casa 0101. It's a theater in Boyle Heights, so I teach playwriting as well too. So yeah, I'm always interested to learn new things, and to fine tune what I already know. So it's like this continuous thing. So wherever it is that you end up landing like a job, you they usually have like, trainings for their particular like school, which is great, professional development, right? Some of you probably attended some of these things, in your own professions, right? So that's something that as a teacher you continue to learn, right? You know what I'm saying? So, and that's the fun part of it, right? Because it's never like this stagnant thing, and sort of it's alive, and sort of like even if it's the same class that you teach over and over again, uh I still enter it with a what I'm saying, with a lot of questions, and sort of like I have kind of like discovery in mind. And that's kind of what I still instill to my students as well too. Having that like passion for inquiry, and even if it's like a class, it's like, oh, I gotta, those classes sometimes you gotta jump through a hoop. I teach a lot of those. Like, oh, I just gotta take this to, because I have to, right? So it's like really bringing in your own personality, what fires you, you know what I'm saying? What do you have passion for within like the text that you're teaching, the curriculum, and that's gonna show, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes when you've been doing it for a while, you need kind of to remind yourself as well too, right? That it should be something else, that it's not just the stagnant thing that you've taught over and over again or whatever it is, and always adapting to learning styles. And especially our students now, right? It's not to discourage you, right? But it's kind of like their attention is like diminishing every second, what I'm saying? Because there's so much on their cell phones, and it's like discovering new ways of incorporating the cell phone, the technology, but also like coming back, being reflective, and sort of seeing like, okay, so what moves can I make to engage them? You know what I'm saying? What can I do to kind of like adjust things, or to shake things up, and to um bring in my personality, and going back to that idea of discovery. Where can I discover things, right? And let me know if you have any questions as well too, in anything. I'm still learning.
No, that's really one of the things that I wanted to hear about here because, teaching political theory and constitutional law can get pretty dry. I do want to be able to capture the attention, get them away from whatever it is on the internet that they might be peeking at. I've got some ideas of how to make it more exciting, obviously, but it's not, it's not AI and even cultural studies, which I found to be a lot more exciting in terms of being taught. But yeah, I'm really looking for ways to engage the students and to keep their attention and really get them interested and excited and enthusiastic about what I'm saying.
Thank you, Mark. And Juan Carlos, that was really good advice. I took notes on that. So yeah, if anybody is curious, I'm just going to drop in the slides for today ahead of time. And just since Maggie just came in, welcome. Glad to have you here. My name is Violet Luxton, and I'm a fellow at Cafe. And so this is going to be a theoretical journey into transformative curriculum, what that means, really getting into the keywords and the terminology and the theory behind curriculum building and learning itself. And then do a little bit of tool workshopping together and best practice sharing. So if you just want to introduce yourself and what drew you to this webinar today, what you're hoping to get from it, what one question you might have is, and yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's good to see everyone. I think, Juan Carlos, are you in the Friday dissertation writing group? I think we've talked to you. Yeah, I remember your story. Yeah. Um, I am a DRPH student. That's a Doctor of Public Health student at CGU. I also adjunct at Cal State LA in public health. Right now I'm working with Masters of Public Health students. Violet, I think we've met before because I worked with Bree Hemingway in her class. And so a lot of things going on. I mean, my work is in LGBTQ plus health. And so there's that. I think for most of my life, I've done a lot of work before I came to academia, just working in community spaces, working with a lot of different nonprofits, not just LGBTQ, but also women's health, um, like domestic violence hotlines, child assault prevention. So I've done a lot of work in those spaces. And so most of my life, my teaching was done more in workshops and in the community. And I appreciated what you were saying about always changing, never the same, never 2 days the same. I was a health educator with Planned Parenthood, so working with teenagers and having those discussions about health and sexuality and relationships. So always, always very dynamic. And that's what drew me to, wanting to go back and get my doctorate and to kind of further my, go deeper into my field. And that's because I had already started teaching at the Cal States before I came back to work on my doctorate. My biggest thing right now, and Juan Carlos, you touched on it, is just being, um, you know, being present, bringing tools to the classroom to keep students engaged in the topics. I mean, I'm working with public health topics, which in and of itself are always changing and dynamic, especially right now. And so I think that's exciting and finding, and I've been bringing more and more rather than just having like a textbook for a class, but just bringing in what's actually going on, and writings that are going on in the community and kind of infusing classes with, just day-to-day knowledge in terms of what's going on in the world. Um, I think, in terms of inclusivity it's an interesting word at the moment. I feel that there is so much work that so many of us have done for many years that is just under all out assault, and particularly in the classroom. And so that's part of what I just wanted to kind of explore and connect with other educators on, is like, how do we teach what we know to be valid history, valid truth, valid techniques, ways, particularly in, my field, ways that we can connect and work with different communities that are seeking healing for their communities. How do we do that when we're also facing a lot of really ugly forces that are very negative right now? So yes, that's kind of where I'm at. But glad to be here. Glad to see you. Good to meet you, Mark. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Maggie. I'm just dropping in some active listening, what I heard you say, just to kind of spark that if folks want to reference the chat. And thank you all for sharing. So I'm happy it's an intimate group today because we'll be able to do a lot of back and forth. And we have Juan Carlos here and Maggie here. And both of you have some formal teaching experience, and Mark and I are on the theoretical side and still kind of in different stages of our teaching career there. So I think this is a pretty good kind of intercontextual and just stratified group of knowledge systems. I'm also really happy that we represent different disciplines because a lot of inclusivity, as you'll come to find, can be defined in different ways depending on your disciplinary lens and kind of what your goals are. So I'm going to just drop in to the chat the slides I mentioned for today. And again, it's going to be in the presentation, but for folks who just want to take a look ahead, this is another element of inclusive teaching. So if your students have text-to-speech readers, sometimes different accessibility needs require the slides ahead of time so folks can kind of go through them with their different softwares. So I always do that. And then just making sure that we will have a little exercise. That's more for if we had a larger group. So we might not do the mentee exercise, but the links to all the slides and then some collection of the text that we're going to talk about and a bibliography of everything I cite is in that Google Drive. So if you want to reference the materials, the texts, as much as I was able to get from the library and put into PDFs and whatnot, I did so there. And I also tried to get disciplinary breadth of inclusive teaching practices and some of the latest research there. So I'm happy to be in collaboration. And if there's any trouble accessing anything, just let me know. And I'll work on updating those permissions. But without further ado, I'm going to get started sharing my screen. And when I do so, if you don't mind just giving me a thumbs up here that you can see everything okay. Oh, great. Okay, thanks, Juan Carlos. Okay, cool. So can everybody hear me okay and see everything all right? Okay, good. So we're going to go further ahead, actually. The what is culture is a little bit further down the road. But so transformative teaching. Obviously, we're all here because we see the benefits of education. We're devoted our lives significantly to being in education in one way or the other. So we see that transformative power already, or otherwise we wouldn't be here. So we're going to kind of get a little more into the theory and the weeds on how teaching can be transformative and limitations, pros and cons to different transformative approaches. So again, for folks that just like the QR code or just clicking, the slides and resources I dropped in the chat are also available on this slide. And so I just, we did a little bit of this already, but if there's any lingering objectives, I don't want to assume that my objectives for the webinar are your objectives. So another aspect of inclusive teaching is quickening the dialogue and what Paulo Freire called dialergic interaction. So making sure there's a back and forth between everybody in this webinar. We're all learning from each other. So if there's any objectives or anything you really want to make sure that I cover, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and just share it. Otherwise, we can move on. But I'd love to hear any burning things that you just really want to make sure get covered.
I just had a quick question, Violet. So when I go to the link that you put in the chat, it's a whole bunch of documents. I didn't quite. What is this document called?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So the slides are going to be one PDF, and you'll see them. They have the title photo, and then I tried to get as many readings as I could and download them as in PDF form. And then you'll see a bibliography. You'll see a Word doc, and that's a bibliography of all the sources. So you can see the sources on the slides. I tried to keep those together as much as possible, but then just make you a bibliography. So if you just want to reference things on your own, and I included hyperlinks, so you can just click on things and find them. But where I could, I tried to download the material itself and put those in as PDFs for you, for your own reading.
That's very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So just some resources. Also, the cafe website has a lot of resources as well. So I don't want to overwhelm you, but this can be a living drive. So if you want to comment in the bibliography, I'll right now you have viewing permission, but I'll change that to editing permissions for all of you. So if we want to keep the conversation going, we are always accessible at the cafe email. But if you want to keep a knowledge community going with these living documents, I feel like part of inclusive and transformative teaching is understanding that knowledge production is an individual process, but really a collective process. So I want to learn with you all where the institutional gaze doesn't reach, so that's also why this is a personal drive. If there's anything personal you want to share, obviously it'll be kept confidential. But sometimes some of the best learning happens away from the institutional gaze. So that is another way of being inclusive and inviting you all to share your thoughts. So thank you for that, Maggie. Any other questions before we continue on into the webinar? All right, cool. So my objectives are just to understand the importance, which I feel like all of you do. So, but how to articulate the importance for your discipline, for your field. So all of us, I feel, understand the value of inclusivity and culturally inclusive curriculum. But as you'll see, culture is really hard to define. Inclusivity, all of these words are constantly up for debate. And the territory and the battle over them is always happening. And so, as Maggie mentioned, the context and the content of what we teach is constantly evolving. And so, I just want to give you tools to be able to define the basics of culturally inclusive curriculum. If you're defending it, being out there defending intellectual pursuits and intellectual institutions, so that you can have the basics for that. And then, what does that mean in practice? Removing barriers to learning. It's pretty simple. So how do we do that in application? And thankfully, I feel like we have a good amount of personal experience that we could really share best practices with each other. And then how to integrate diverse knowledge systems. So whether that's your students' experience, whether that's transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary learning, whether that is learning from non-traditional student demographics, or taking sites of learning outside of the classroom and making educational encounters everywhere you go, just really making it a part of your daily life. I think Maggie mentioned that daily life element of teaching and learning everywhere. And so those are my objectives today. And again, if you have any comments or anything, feel free to raise your hand. This is a pretty informal presentation, and we're all familiar with each other. So happy to stop anytime and just chat. Okay, and then just a basic outline. This isn't going to be so much of a workshop as it will be a discussion. We will do some workshopping and practical resources at the end, but it's going to be very much a theoretical exercise, really getting into the terminology and the approaches and some of the research so that you can defend what these terms mean. Because part of the way oftentimes terms are co-opted and weaponized is because people don't know what they mean, or there's not an understanding of multiple meanings. And so that's really the goal, is to defend education and to understand these key words. What is education, teaching and learning? What is culture? What is curriculum? What is diversity? And what makes it critical? And so there are probably not going to do breakout exercises because that would be for a larger group, but also the pitfalls, the limitations. So every method of diversity, equity, inclusion, it comes from prior histories. W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about multiculturalism and systemic oppression all the way back in the early 1900s. So DEI isn't necessarily a new concept, but again, the words evolve. So understanding the genealogy of the terms is really important. We're not going to get so much into the genealogy today as so much of the keywords that are critical now. But there are a plethora of other areas: emancipatory education, liberatory education, abolitionist education. All of these are areas that I encourage you to explore. But right now, just for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to focus on diversity and inclusive pedagogy. So what inclusion means, and some basics of DEI. Okay. So this is a quote that's always inspired me. I'm sure many of you know bell hooks, but one of the key texts, just to get into the textual foundations of inclusive pedagogy, is Teaching to Transgress. Many of you might know Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and the wealth of other books that he's published. But Hooks says that the classroom is one of the most radical spaces of possibility in the academy. And again, that's not a small thing. Many of us can feel overwhelmed in our day-to-day, and we have jobs, we're dealing with the same news as everybody else, and we still show up to the classroom, we still show up to webinars like this, and that's because there is a space of radical possibility in teaching. Teaching is a transformative act. And so I just wanted to share this text. It's also full in the Google Drive, so if you want to read it, I encourage you to read it and talk to us about it. But one of the ways she begins is with the word "to begin." for those of you that remember the first chapter. And so begin, if you look at the etymology, it's really beginning again and beginning anew. So it's an iterative act. So part of teaching to transgress is not assuming that teaching takes place in one area, one location, or hierarchies of knowledge, or that you achieve something and then you're just concretized or settled, but you're always iterative, critical, reflective, looking back. And that's a part of the critical process. So this is just a really good text to familiarize yourself with. And then this is from Sengupta, Blessinger, Hoffman, and Makanya. And this is for an international perspective to inclusive teaching. So I don't want to just have an American exceptionalist approach. Inclusivity, as we mentioned, it can be disciplinary specific. So how are you inclusive as a music teacher? How are you inclusive as a political science teacher? But it can also be, how do you welcome different national identities, transnational identities into your classroom? So inclusivity is can really be approached from a number of different axes. And I put, I believe, the introduction to this text into your resource guide, so feel free to look at it. And so this is just for folks that are interested in more international politics and international ways of looking at inclusivity outside of just the American lens, because Hooks is an American professor, and it's very much about teaching her experience in American classrooms. So inclusivity can mean a lot of different things. But really what Hooks and this quote is saying is the classroom is a microcosm of society. And so, you know, if you are thinking in a dualistic lens, you might think you need to solve your own problems before you solve society's problems, or solve society's problems before you solve the problems in the classroom. And again, this is iterative, it's reflexive, it's nuanced, it's messy. And so, you know, solving your own problem, solving, you know, might be too final, but continuously returning to and grappling with the problems in the classroom will be reflected in society, and so forth and so on. Okay, so just the basics. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what DEI is. There's also terms of belonging that have been added, so particularly around inclusion. So not just including folks, but really making sure that when we include folks in systems of power, they feel like a sense of belonging, like they can bring their full self into the space. But diversity is really can be dissected into a number of different categories, as I mentioned: nationality, religion, age, just all the different ways that we can identify. And equity, as you can see here, it's not necessarily giving everybody an equal opportunity, but making sure that you're removing barriers to folks accessing those opportunities. So on the left, you can give everybody an equal opportunity, but if there's been years of systemic oppression, years of lack of education, of systems like redlining, where folks were segregated into specific areas, then just all of a sudden giving everybody equal opportunity isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. So equity is about removing barriers to accessing education and services, so that everybody has an equal chance to access that opportunity. And then inclusion, again, just having folks involved in a project that might be from marginalized communities might not necessarily be enough. Are you giving those folks a seat at the table? So for example, if you're working with Native elders and you're doing a project on cultural preservation, are the Native elders active in the evaluation of that project? Are they getting paid from that project? Do they have a say-so in what goes into the content and curriculum and the teaching style of your project? So how can you make sure that you're not just taking knowledge from people and preserving it as if it's an object of study behind glass? Are you really contributing back to the communities that you're involving yourself with? And how can you think really deeply about equitable power structures and horizontal power structures, and making sure that it's not just a top-down, but a bottom-up process as well? So those are just some of the really basic core ideas here. But before moving on, does anybody have any questions about kind of the basics, or any comments or experiences? Okay, cool, awesome. Okay, so just understanding diversity here, and this all of these sources I got from the cafe website. So as you go in our final exercise, we'll go to the website and dig around, but everything you can find on the cafe website in the resource section as well. So what does diversity mean? Again, we saw some puzzle pieces with some categories, but really it's just understanding that there's always a wide range of identities that folks can belong to. These are shifting identities. So somebody might belong to an identity that they no longer feel fits with them. So understanding diversity is really actively listening to the body language, listening to the tone, listening to where your students are comfortable and meeting them where they're at and figuring out where they might come from and what they might bring to the table. Again, the most common ones are race, gender, class, ability, but there's many more. And this is going to shape how students learn, how they engage with content. So just as an anecdote, I have experience working with Native American high school students, and one of the cultural facts that I needed to really identify and understand is eye contact is not seen as a universal sign of respect everywhere. So in American culture, eye contact is seen sometimes as a sign of confidence. But with certain Native students, actually not giving eye contact was a sign of respect. And so a lot of times teachers were labeling students as disengaged or not paying attention or not as confident. And so if you start assuming things because maybe you come from an American background, it's really important to build your cultural sensitivity and your knowledge of how different folks, even within the same country, can show respect. So, maybe all of your students are looking the other way or not paying attention. You're like, oh my goodness, you can personalize that and make it about you. Oh, I must not be as intriguing or engaging today. And then maybe you'll push back and try and get them to pay attention. But just stop. It's really about staying calm in the classroom and taking a breath and saying, is there something I need to pay attention to? Just before you draw conclusions, try and understand and identify just the fact that students might not be giving eye contact to stick with that example, and then get curious about it. Like Juan Carlos said, it's about discovery and curiosity and passion. And you're here to form relationships that you want to take out into the world. So if you're kind of freaking out and demanding a certain type of one size fits all respect, then that's what your students are going to learn through modeling. And so stay curious, stay calm, and stay passionate. But that's kind of the basics of diversity. So again, some categories, it could be race, ethnicity, it could be ability and disability. So making sure you're up to date with ADA compliance in your Canvas courses. Canvas has a lot of ADA features, and we have a webinar on our cafe website that goes into ADA compliance. We actually have several ADA compliant webinars. We have webinars on LGBTQIA plus populations and how to be sensitive. So really, I would find a category that really speaks to you and your students. If you're noticing your students are all coming from similar backgrounds, then maybe start with that category first and educate yourself. And then make your rounds. And this is a lifelong process, and all of these things are constantly changing. So just, take it easy, but make sure that you're diligent and learning about as many different categories as diversity as you can. In higher ed, if you're working with graduate students, educational background. Maybe there's a lot of first-gen students. Maybe students might be juggling a lot of different things and might not have had, Ivy League education, or parents that even have graduate level education. So understanding those barriers in knowledge systems for your students, and understand what tools might be available. So AI has been shown, and I'm sure Juan Carlos can share more on this, but has shown to solve equity issues with students who might study at 11 p.m. and might not have faculty availability to do a back and forth at that time. Or, they might not feel comfortable or safe asking faculty questions that they'll ask the AI. So understanding the pros of tools to remove barriers, but also AI has been shown to have difficulty transferring that historical consciousness or critical consciousness. For those of you that are not in the historical disciplines, just critical consciousness and that high level thinking. But it's very good at translating documents if they're looking at early manuscripts in languages or just dialects of English that are hard to understand. So understand the limitations, the pros and cons of the tools that you use, and just the basic categories of diversity to be aware of and to start chipping away at. And Juan Carlos, is there anything that you want to add or anything anybody wants to add about personal anecdotes or anything that might be good for the group?
Yeah, couple things. What should I start with? Oh, just yeah, the use of AI, right? Yeah, and sort of it leveraging it to fit like your curriculum is really important as well too. I know like I I know professors that are resistant to it, right? And the thing about it is our students are using it. I've had a shift from I used to have my students read a lot of like critical articles, right? And I've really uh focused on having my assignments be student centered in the sense of, you know, students talking about their own experience. I've always done that, but it's even more so now, right? So it's like the advent of AI is going to be incorporated on all the like tools that we use or Word or PowerPoint, right? And I see it as a good thing. I see the pitfalls of it as well too, right? Because it's like, where do we come in as professors as well too? But yeah, they're not doing away with us. We just have to kind of put in the time to learn how to leverage it as well too. And it's kind of there's a lot of possibilities with it, you know what I'm saying? So in my mind, I'm just hoping that illiteracy rates are reduced greatly in the US and other parts of the world as well too, because of the advent of AI. There's all these possibilities where we could like really do away with a lot of social ills, right? So, yeah, I'll keep on going, but let me know, right? So, AI, good thing. Learn how to use it, encourage your students to use it well, because they're going to use it anyways, right? So, just to put that out there.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, we've started I have a co-teacher with my Cal State LA class, and we've put something in the syllabus. We have a discussion with students at the beginning of the class. Um, and, maybe having that discussion about like how to use it, and because my probably biggest, I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons about AI, you're right, but my biggest concern is I want them to have the ability to write in their own voice. And AI could write the paper for them, right? But that's not them, developing their own voice and their own writing. And so trying to do that kind of balance, like saying, okay, use it to do outlines, use it to get ideas, use it to develop, something. Um, and I know for me, I was one of those people that personally, I was like, this kind of freaked me out, didn't want to use it. Um, and I've started trying, things to use it, going to workshops that are teaching me more about it. But again, it's a tool. It's a tool. And I think if we talk with students about how they can use it to their benefit, then it can be a good thing. And also in that discussion, talking about the ethics of it too, because I think that's the big thing that everyone's all concerned about, right? Is like, what is the ethical use of this? I don't know that we really totally have answers to that yet either. So
Yeah, it's and yeah, I talked about this last week because I'm teaching a class. It's it's kind of comforting and it's kind of weird at the same time. When you learn how to like leverage it, like because you could kind of create like a tutor, within AI. So you could give it like this prompt where it's like it doesn't give you all the answers. It kind of asks you questions and you're able to respond to it like it's a real person, right? And a lot of value to that, right? You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, up late at night, who you got to talk to, right? Sometimes they have the 24-hour chat, like library. Some college libraries have that. But say this, it seems like it's a real person responding to you, and it's going down kind of like a process as well too, where it's not like giving you everything, right? So a really highly advanced kind of Google search, you know what I'm saying? But it should be the starting point, and that's what I tell my students. And again, I've shifted it more towards their personal experience, their lived experience, their observations. AI can't process trauma, you know what I'm saying? And that's kind of like one of the things that I'm sort of like grappling with as well too. Like with my playwriting class was more creative, and the academic side as well too. But yeah, I'll keep on going about this, but great.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Juan Carlos. I love it. I really appreciate both of your comments and expertise because it's spot on. We're still building the plane, and so it's just important to know, as both of you mentioned, the pros and cons of what we're doing, and just be as conscious and open-eyed as we can. And so, yeah, kind of just understanding the benefits of diversity and inclusion. I think we've all experienced that personally, being maybe in moments where we were included or where we were excluded, and we don't want that to happen. But generally, good things happen when folks are valued. Big surprise, in the classroom for their experience, and not turned into a cookie cutter kind of cutout of what folks think, but we really value people and create opportunities to bring their full self. So you can look at the research. All of this is very text heavy, but it's intended for you to go back on your own and then have access to research. Again, I assume that you're passionate about teaching, and you might have to defend any of these ideas. So this is just a way to have access to research on that. But academic persistence, thriving, greater capacity for success, meaningful connections, and meaning building. All of these things have been statistically proven, research to back them up of why diversity is important. So long story short, there's a higher quality of education, teaching, and learning. And then I'm going to get into a little bit of the etymology of why that might be. So beyond just the current research, and starting kind of what does inclusivity mean and where it came from. So it's a term that came in the 90s. A lot of these terms regarding DEI came about in the 90s, which makes sense because that's when a lot of these theories started getting put into practice. So theories that might have been developed like Hooks's book, Teaching to Transgress, came out in 94. Paulo Freire's book, I believe some of his first books were in the 60s. So it takes 10 years or so for the academy to kind of theorize and then put these into practice. But really, it just means including, welcoming, supporting students from diverse backgrounds. Again, without tokenizing them, without assuming that just because they come from a diverse background, that any of their behavior is predictable or inherent or essential to their identity. We really want to avoid making any of those statements or assumptions about our students. So we're really just curious and passionate about including them. But again, not assuming that their inclusion is going to have any type of predictable outcome. Okay, so this was going to be a group exercise in what is culture. But for the sake of time and just the small intimate group today, I'll just jump in. So if you're, think about what pops into your head when you think of culture. I think of the food I eat. I think of my family. I think of the smells in the kitchen. That's just what comes into my mind. You probably have different assumptions and connotations that might come up, but it's not an easy thing to define. So Raymond Williams, I've been a cultural studies student I'm in my third year, and it took me a long time to even define my field. And, it is a proto field, it's naturally transdisciplinary, so I don't feel bad about that. But if we're going to be defending these ideas, we need to have some way of defining our terms. So part of being inclusive is defining your terms with your students, not assuming that because you use this word or that word, that they know what that means. Because again, these are co-optation wars. I believe Maggie used the word attack when she mentioned how educators are coming in. So the words are up for grabs, and whoever grabs them will grab the attention and will grab the predictive behavior or obedience of, how to wield these words. So Raymond Williams is one of the founders of cultural studies. One of the key figures, I'll say, and he wrote a whole book, Keywords, because he realized that the language and the linguistics were having a big effect on how folks were open to inclusivity. And so he said culture is one of the 2 or 3 most complicated words in the English language. And so I took the chapter. If you want to read page 49, I highly, highly recommend it, because it goes into the etymology of the word and how words change even from one nation to the next, from one decade to the next. What culture meant 50 years ago, it might not mean today. And so these words travel. They travel as they get translated across languages. We mentioned transnational aspects to inclusion. So it's not just it's not even what kind of you understand the word as, but how is this word understood in different times, in different disciplines, and in different geographies. And so that's important. So Raymond Williams is a really good scholar to kind of analyze culture. And pretty much, Merriam-Webster, it's the aspects that Maggie mentioned of everyday existence. So it's what we do every day. It's also attitudes, values, goals, practices, which are very hard to pin down, but some folks have tried to do that. And etymologically, it really comes from words for to inhabit. So our bodies, our identities, how we inhabit, that's still present in the meaning today. To cultivate, what are we cultivating in terms of in the classroom, in our own minds, in our own subjectivities and inner subjectivities? So it comes from gardening, husbandry, to protect our boundaries. Who are we? Back to identity, and honor. How do we want to live? What is valuable to us? What do we want to place value on? And that kind of goes to the modern Merriam-Webster definition of goals, practices, attitudes, and so on and so forth. But it is interesting to kind of note the etymological roots there. So another way that culture is measured is by Gert Hofstede. He has 6 dimensions of culture, and he does it by nation. So he broke up nations. He looks at, he gives each country a score, and he looks at how much they are egalitarian or authoritarian, how hierarchical is their power structure. Are they collective? Are they individualistic? So all of these categories you can take as just ways to understand your students. If your students are coming from a highly collective culture, maybe putting them in a project that's highly individualized might not be the best way they learn. So learning in groups, creating knowledge together like we're doing today. How comfortable is the culture with uncertainty? That's another really big thing. If all of your assignments have a lot of uncertainty, a lack of structure, that might work for you. You might thrive in that environment, but maybe your students, that it might give them an unnecessary amount of anxiety. So try to balance all of these things, even in the way cultures goal set. Are they short-term oriented? Are they long-term oriented? So is cultural restraint seen as a good thing, or is impulsivity and bravado seen as something that's valued? So all of these are going to affect how your students behave and act in the classroom. And if you're just curious and you want to kind of test out, your knowledge of one country to the next, you can play around with his globe, and you can do comparisons and kind of see what your own country's score might be. And then think about the drawbacks. So if you have comments, please put it in the Google Doc in the bibliography document. I'm going to make that editable so that we can all comment on the sources and what we think. And as you're reading, if you get a really great spark of inspiration or an idea, please share it, because I would love to hear it. So again, not assuming I know, we know what culture is, not assuming we know what curriculum is either. But here in the graphic, you can pretty much see all the things that curriculum touches. So it's really every aspect of teaching and learning. And again, these come from Latin words. So just like culture, it has a Latin root. Curriculum, another Latin word. This comes from the root to run, and really corridor, courier. So running through a course. So kind of grapple with that. Like, why do you think our word for teaching and learning might have to do with running a course? But you could clearly see a course. We still use this in our everyday language today. We call classes courses. So think about that. Okay, so what is learning? For the sake of time, I encourage you to take 5 minutes on your own and kind of go through all the different learning styles that are at this link. So this is just a plethora of different types of learning styles and theories on learning itself. And so there's multiple intelligence theory that goes into emotional intelligence and different ways that intelligence can manifest, right down to different theories on how people learn, which we kind of touched on with the 6 dimensions of culture and how that might predispose people to learn in different ways. But again, important not to make assumptions about how any student coming from any background will learn. This is just to help you familiarize yourself with these methods so that you can understand and modulate in the classroom rapidly and be adaptive and flexible to all these different learning styles. So I encourage you to do this on your own. And just another little etymological tidbit for building an argument for DEI. So this is all going to circle back to how to defend DEI, how to defend inclusivity. So I'm not just going into the etymology, although I do find it's fun, but there's a larger argument here that you might be catching up on now. So the word to learn even goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root for furrow or track. And if you remember curriculum, course, running. So if you love neuroscience, this is a neuron here. There's a pathway. These are neural pathways. So some of the theories on learning, if you're going to take a neurological approach, it'll talk about branching pathways and making robust neural networks as a form of knowledge sequestering and your net of how you capture knowledge and meaning and information. And even a neural pathway, even the way that we talk about how our neurons are structured, we keep using these languages of from here to there, pathways, running, movement. And so just as a question here, what do you see as common denominators between the etymology of curriculum, of learning, of all of these words that we mentioned? Are you seeing some similarities, and why do you think they all have these roots about movement? And what do you think is important from your discipline or from your perspective about how culture and teaching and learning and these things have been measured?
Well, I can start with political theory because in my discipline, Western culture has been so centered that we have, to such a great extent, excluded different cultures, different areas of learning, different ways of learning. There's a huge oral tradition in the African countries and in the Native American cultures that was not a part of Western Europe. So when we talk about what is in my discipline, what are some of the bases of political theory, it goes right to, a lot of times, and we've done a lot of work to get around this, right to the Western canons of political discipline. And it's something that a lot of students will not, especially as we become more international and more diverse, they're not going to necessarily identify with from their own lived cultural experience in either their own countries or in their own families.
Thank you, Mark. Spot on. Yep.
That's really interesting, Mark. What really strikes me is just fluidity, that culture, I see culture as being extremely fluid there. I think we think of, even when we talk about traditions, but there's so much in terms of just people, just movement of people throughout the world in terms of one culture encounters another, and then things morph and they change, and there's a synergy, so that's kind of what's running through my mind right now, is how um, learning is very much like that, right? That you encounter different concepts, you learn different things, you build on them, and then you move to another place.
Thank you, Maggie. Exactly.
Yeah, just to add on to that, yeah, movement, right? And sort of it's what's coming to mind is like murals, right? We
Mm.
we kind of tend to think like, murals that we see as like stagnant, even that they're capturing a certain point in time, you know what I'm saying? Which is kind of okay, so it's thinking in terms of it being resistant in the sense, and I know I'm talking like broadly as well too, so not to get too esoteric. Um, it's still kind of representative of a type of thought of the time, or I should bring in a specific example. Okay, yeah, I'll just leave it at movement. Really important, right? You know what I'm saying? And
Mm.
pedagogy and our thoughts and sort of like this idea of like challenging like the canons as well too is really, really important, because that's something that's the Western canons have always kind of, not always, but certain times they've been like resistant to, you know, really being like inclusive and really like thinking in terms of like the multiplicity of voices, right? So, I live in Southern California. It's like, like LA, there's a multiplicity of communities within when you say Los Angeles, right? And just being mindful of that as well too is really important.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. I like the mural reference too. As non-traditional forms of pedagogy and sites of learning, and taking information and culture out of the classroom and decorating, and beautifying public space and kind of confronting public-private sector dichotomies and all of that. So thank you, Mark and Maggie and Juan Carlos, because all of that is precisely right. So I'm glad the argument is building up well. So pretty much we're defending DEI. So if literally etymologically embedded in the way that we learn, not only from a learning theory perspective, but also from a terminology perspective, the word itself implies movement. So as Mark mentioned, if you're always going to the canon, the Western canon, and that's a point, where's the movement? It's not there. So you have to go outside of what is centered or what is seen as dominant, the hierarchy of knowledge. You have to get outside of that. As Juan Carlos mentioned with the murals, you have to move, or Maggie mentioned about dynamism and fluidity. Movement is happening no matter what. So if you're really growing, are you gonna, how are you gonna stay put? You can't, neurologically, you can't stay put. That's called death of the mind. Learning theory wise, you have to branch out. So hopefully now you have an argument from a learning theory perspective when you kind of go back and see the different learning theories, from an etymological perspective, from a terminology perspective of why diversity is fundamental to learning. Equity, inclusion are fundamental to innovation and to the high standard of excellence that we hope to bring to the classroom. There's an altruism because that might be our value system and our attitudes that might be culturally determined for us. But just fundamentally, there is an obligation and a responsibility to our students to give them the highest caliber of excellence. And that is my argument for why diversity is a high caliber of excellence, because you're not going to learn if you don't move. And movement can mean, as all of you mentioned in different ways, it can mean moving out of the classroom, making your resources accessible to places like Discord servers, where there's not the institutional gaze, or murals, or projects that land-based learning, or making the Western canon not centered. Maybe you start in a different area for your class. How are you going to construct value for your students? And then movement can also be reflection. So Hooks, Freire, Rancière, a lot of folks that are figures in critical pedagogy talk about the need for constant reflection. So teaching your students how to reflect, you constantly reflecting, there's no, okay, I'm doing this work now and I just don't need to reflect or evaluate myself, or you're always reflecting and evaluating yourself. And dialogue, because you can't evaluate yourself on your own. That's why we're all here today. And hopefully this community will continue in the Google Docs and in future webinars and future appointments with Cafe, so that we can keep the conversation going as we put these things into practice. Please let us know how you reflect, how dialogue works for you. And I believe Kant mentioned like a quickening of the mind as one of the ways of knowledge and of a heightened state of learning. So quickening the mind with your students. We're all kind of sharing a mind in a sense right now, metaphorically. So how can we quicken the dialogue between each other? We're all nodes in our own network. So dialogue, reflection are critical components of movement and knowledge production. So thank you all. There's some other resources at the end of the slide, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to talk about DEI limitations. We already talked a little bit about essentialism, tokenization, not assuming any identities, and also looking at how folks in the 60s, particularly 1968 in France, approached DEI and inclusion, because some of the most radical French professors were like, we just need more diverse voices in our universities. And then their students talked back to them and said, no, we need to rearrange the roles of teacher and student completely. We don't want to be included in a hierarchy. It's time to totally revamp the roles of teaching and learning. And then this is just a checklist for inclusivity so that you can practice it on your own. And then a little bit about the history of Black feminist approaches to intersectionality. You can read about that. Again, some of the limits to an intersectional approach, because an intersectional approach is a broad overview. It's a holistic approach. But as we know, we are not the sum of our parts. And so just like there's limitations to getting granular and understanding people from only one category of diversity, there's also limitations to understanding them as interlocking nexuses of oppression. So we need to be able to toggle between the granular and the abstract to truly be critical. So it's always good to know the limitations to every approach. And we didn't have time for this today. I apologize, but really it's just familiarizing yourself with the website and the tools and the curriculum building tools, which we were going to do and kind of share out on. So we can continue that in our knowledge community that we've built now. So I'm really grateful that you all came today. And just want to say it doesn't have to end here. So we do have professional teaching certificates, which Juan Carlos can tell you about. We have appointments. So if you just want to do one-on-one and talk with one of the fellows about, hey, I have this idea in my class. I want to test it out and get feedback in a really non-judgmental space. If you want to do a teaching demo for us, we'll show up and you can do a teaching demo and we will give you feedback and it'll be a formal process for you. And then we also have a lot of resources on our website. So thank you so much for joining me. And I'll just open it up. I know we're a little over time, so no worries if you have to go. But if you do have any last minute questions or anything, feel free. I'm happy to stay an additional 5-10 minutes if there's anything anybody wants to say. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming.